blade was already moving before the announcer finished his sentence. I saw it catch the light, a thin curve of polished metal aimed straight at my collarbone, and I did not step back. I did not raise my arm to block it either. I simply turned my shoulder half an inch, and the blade passed through the space where I used to be, and the entire arena went quiet in a way that 1,000 throats had clearly not expected. My name is Mara Whitfield, and 3 hours earlier I had been drinking tea in a diplomatic lounge on a station orbiting a world I could not pronounce correctly. Now I was standing barefoot on packed white sand, facing a young noble named Kale who had been told her entire life that humans were something to be tolerated, not respected. The Vostar called this the knife test. It was supposed to be a coming-of-age ritual. A young noble draws a ceremonial blade against a representative of a lesser species, proves their dominance in front of the court, and earns the right to sit among the elders. For 3 centuries, the lesser species had always been Vostar themselves, drawn from lower clans. This was the first time they had chosen an outsider. They chose me because someone on the Vostar Council believed a human would be an easy demonstration. Soft, slow, polite to a fault. A perfect prop for a young noble to look strong beside. I had agreed to stand in that arena for exactly one reason. My colleague Grace Bellamy, who ran our embassy on this station, had been quietly warned that if no human accepted the challenge, the Vostar would use it as proof that humanity was afraid of them, and that fear would shape every negotiation for the next decade. So I volunteered instead of her, because I have spent 11 years training in close combat disciplines that most diplomats never mention on their resumes, and because somebody needed to make sure this story ended differently. Kale recovered from her missed strike faster than I expected. She was already resetting her stance, blade held low, eyes narrowed with something between confusion and anger. "You should have bled by now," she said. Her translator device gave her voice a flat, metallic edge, but I could hear the frustration underneath it. "I get that a lot," I said. She came at me again, and this time she was faster, a diagonal cut meant to open my shoulder from collar to elbow. I stepped inside the arc of the blade instead of away from it, closing the distance before she could adjust, and caught her wrist with both hands. I did not twist it. I did not break anything. I simply held it still, the way you might hold a door closed against wind, using just enough force to stop the motion and nothing more. The crowd in the tiers above us made a sound I had not heard before, a kind of collective intake of breath from creatures whose lungs were not shaped like mine. "Let go of me," Kale said. "In a second," I said. "First, I want you to notice something. Your elbow is locked. Your weight is entirely on your front foot. If I wanted to put you on the ground right now, you would already be there." I released her wrist. She stumbled back half a step, more from surprise than from any force I had used, and looked down at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. Up in the highest tier, reserved for the eldest members of the ruling council, I could see a cluster of Vostar elders leaning toward one another, their neck plating flaring in a way I had learned meant genuine alarm. This was not supposed to happen. The lesser species was supposed to flinch, to bleed a little, to apologize profusely and step back so the young noble could claim her victory and move on to the feast that always followed these rituals. Kale straightened her back and lifted the blade again. Her pride would not let her stop, not with her whole clan watching, not with the memory of every ancestor who had stood in this same arena and won. "You are mocking me," she said. "I'm not," I said, and I meant it. "I'm trying to teach you something, because in about 10 seconds you're going to try the overhead strike your instructor taught you last season, and if you commit to it the way you've committed to everything else today, you're going to end up flat on your back in front of everyone who matters to you. I would rather that didn't happen." She hesitated for exactly 1 heartbeat, and then pride won, the way it usually does at that age, and she raised the blade high for the overhead strike. I caught her forearm before the blade had finished its arc, redirected the motion downward and to the side using nothing but the momentum she had already given me, and guided her, gently, to one knee in the sand. The whole thing took less than a second and looked, to anyone watching from the tiers, like she had simply chosen to kneel. She had not chosen anything. I had simply refused to let the encounter go any other way. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before it. "Get up," I said quietly, offering my hand. "Nobody up there needs to know exactly what happened just now if you don't want them to." She stared at my offered hand like it was something dangerous, then, slowly, took it, and let me pull her to her feet. Her blade lay forgotten in the sand between us. "Why?" she said, and stopped, as if the question had more weight than she knew how to carry. "Why would you offer me mercy? I came here to prove I was stronger than you." "You did prove something," I said, "just not what you think." The head of the council, an elder named Voss Kelrath, whose title I still could not translate precisely, rose from his seat in the highest tier. His voice, when it came, was amplified across the arena by some device built into his collar. "Human," he said. "Explain yourself. The knife test requires a decisive outcome. Blood must be drawn, or a yield must be spoken. Neither has occurred." I turned to face him, and I made sure my voice carried the same distance his had. "There is blood in this arena today," I said. "It just isn't the kind you're expecting. Your test was built on an assumption. That strength looks like drawing first blood. That dominance means someone else has to fall. My species built its confidence around a different idea. We measure strength by what we choose not to do when we could very easily do it. Kale struck at me 4 times today. I could have ended each of those strikes with an injury that would take her weeks to heal. I chose not to, every single time. And that choice was not weakness. It was the entire point." Murmurs rippled through the tiers, spreading outward like water disturbed by a stone. I could see Grace Bellamy standing near the diplomatic entrance, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, watching with an expression somewhere between pride and terror. Voss Kelrath's neck plating flared, then settled. A sign I had learned meant he was recalculating something important. "You are saying your species holds back," he said. "I am saying we choose," I said. "There is a difference between an animal that cannot bite and a person who decides not to. Your test was designed to find out which one we were. I would like the record to reflect that you found out." For a long moment, nobody in the arena moved. Kale stood beside me, rubbing her wrist where I had held it, looking up at the council tier with an expression I recognized from every young person who has ever discovered the world is more complicated than they were told. Then, from somewhere in the lower tiers, another voice rang out, sharper and less patient than the elders. "This is a trick," the voice said. A noble named Pharaoh Idessa, one of Kale's own clan rivals, stood up from his seat. "The human is stalling. Perhaps she cannot actually fight, and is using clever words to disguise a loss." I felt something settle in my chest, calm and certain, the way it always does right before a situation resolves itself one way or another. "I understand the doubt," I said, loud enough for the whole arena to hear. "So let's remove it. I'll take a second challenger, right now. Anyone the council chooses. And this time there will be no ambiguity about the outcome." Grace's hands tightened at the diplomatic entrance. I saw her lean toward the aide beside her and whisper something urgent, but I did not look away from the council tier, because I needed them to see that I meant exactly what I said. Voss Kelrath studied me for a long moment, his ancient eyes calculating something I could not read. "Pharaoh Idessa," he said finally, "you have volunteered your doubt. Perhaps you would like to volunteer your blade as well." The arena erupted into a low buzz of anticipation. Pharaoh's confident posture faltered for just a fraction of a second before he straightened it again, clearly unwilling to back down in front of the entire court after mocking me so openly. He descended from the tiers with exaggerated calm, a much older and more experienced fighter than Kale had been, his blade longer and his stance far more disciplined. I recognized immediately that this would not be as simple as the first encounter. Pharaoh had actually trained for combat, not merely for ceremony. "You should not have opened your mouth," he said as he stepped into the sand across from me. "Probably not," I agreed. "But here we are." He did not announce his strikes the way Kale had. He simply moved. 3 strikes in rapid succession, each one testing a different angle, each one probing for a weakness he expected to find in a species that had never faced real combat training. I stepped through each opening exactly enough to avoid contact, reading the shift of his shoulders before the blade even began to move, letting him spend his energy against empty air. "You are fast," he said, breathing harder now. "You're strong," I said. "Stronger than Kale and better trained. If this were actually a fight, I would already be worried." "This is a fight," he snapped, and came at me with a strike aimed low, sweeping toward my legs in a move clearly meant to end things quickly and decisively. I stepped over the low arc of his blade, caught his extended arm at the wrist and elbow simultaneously, and used his own forward momentum to guide him past me and down onto one knee, exactly as I had with Kale, except this time, I could feel real resistance in his muscles, real effort in the way he tried to twist free. I did not let him free until his knee touched the sand. The arena held its breath again. Pharaoh knelt there for a long moment, chest heaving, his blade still clutched in a hand that no longer had the leverage to use it. I released my grip and stepped back, giving him room to stand on his own. "That is twice now," Voss Kelrath said from the tier above, his voice quieter this time, almost thoughtful. "Twice a Vostar noble has been placed on the ground by this human, and twice she has chosen not to draw blood when she clearly could have." "Because drawing blood was never the point," I said. "The point was always whether I could control the outcome without needing to hurt anyone to do it. That is the actual measure of strength in my species. Not how much damage we can do. How much damage we choose to withhold. Pharaoh rose slowly to his feet, his pride visibly bruised in a way no wound could have matched. He looked at his own blade as if seeing it for the first time, then looked at me with something that had shifted from contempt into a kind of wary respect. "I do not understand your species," he said quietly. "Most people don't, at first," I said. "That's usually when things get interesting." Voss Kelrath raised a hand, and the murmuring throughout the arena settled into silence once more. He descended from the council tier himself, moving slowly with the careful dignity of someone who had ruled for longer than my entire nation's history, and walked to the edge of the sand. "I have presided over 11 of these tests in my lifetime," he said, addressing the crowd as much as me. "Every single one ended the same way. A young noble proves themselves capable of violence, and the court celebrates the continuation of our tradition. Today, for the first time, I have watched a lesson unfold instead of a contest. I do not yet know what to call what I have seen, but I know it deserves a name other than defeat." He turned to me directly. "What would you call it, human?" I considered the question carefully, aware that whatever I said next would be repeated across this station for years, translated and retranslated, until it became something closer to legend than fact. "I would call it an offer," I said. "Your test was built to answer one question: are humans weak? I think you now have your answer, and it is no. But there is a second question underneath the first one, and that is the question that actually matters going forward. Are humans safe to have as neighbors? And the answer to that is also yes, precisely because we choose restraint when restraint is available to us. A species that can hurt you and doesn't is worth trusting far more than a species that simply can't hurt you at all." Voss Kelrath was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes moving between me, Kale, and Pharaoh, both of whom still stood in the sand with expressions caught somewhere between humility and revelation. "The knife test is concluded," he announced finally, his voice carrying across every tier of the arena. "Let the record show that no blood was drawn today, and let the record also show that this was not a failure of the ritual, but perhaps its truest possible outcome. From this day forward, the test shall include a new instruction for every noble who stands in this sand. Victory is not measured only in what you can do to your opponent. It is measured in what you choose not to do, when the choice is entirely yours to make." The crowd's reaction was not the triumphant roar I might have expected from a human audience. It was something quieter, more contemplative, ripples of clicking and murmuring spreading through the tiers, as an entire culture began quietly rewriting 3 centuries of assumptions in real time. Kale approached me again, this time without any blade in her hand at all. "I owe you something," she said. "I do not know the correct word for it in your language." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You showed up and you tried, even after you realized the rules had changed halfway through. That takes its own kind of strength." "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Not the fighting, the other thing, the choosing." I looked at her for a long moment, this young noble who had walked into the arena expecting an easy victory over a soft, foolish outsider, and was walking out of it having learned something no ceremony had ever taught her before. "I can try," I said. "It's not a fast lesson. It takes years, honestly. But I think you already understand the first part of it, because you're asking the question instead of demanding the answer." Pharaoh, still standing nearby, cleared his throat in a way that sounded almost embarrassed. "I would also like to understand this," he said, "though I suspect it will be harder for me, given how thoroughly I doubted you in front of everyone I know." "Doubt isn't the problem," I said. "Staying in doubt after you've seen the evidence, that's the problem. You already changed your mind. That's most of the work done." Grace finally crossed the sand to join us, her earlier tension replaced by something closer to quiet astonishment. "You do realize," she said under her breath, "that you just rewrote a 300-year-old tradition in front of their entire ruling council." "I just refused to lose the way they expected me to," I said. "The rest of it seems to have written itself." Above us, the tiers were slowly emptying, Vostar nobles filing out in clusters, still talking in low, urgent tones about what they had witnessed. I caught fragments of translated conversation as they passed, words like unexpected and reconsider, and perhaps we were wrong, phrases I never expected to hear echoing through a ceremonial arena, built entirely around the idea of proving dominance through force. I walked out of that arena with sand still clinging to my bare feet and no injuries to speak of, which was exactly the outcome I had planned for from the moment I agreed to stand in for Grace. But the thing I had not planned for, the thing that stayed with me long after the crowds had dispersed and the sun over that unfamiliar sky had set, was the look on Kale's face when she finally understood that strength and gentleness were never opposites at all. They had simply never been taught that way before. Voss Kelrath found me later that evening at the edge of the station's observation deck, where I had gone to watch the unfamiliar stars in relative quiet. "You changed something today," he said, standing beside me without ceremony this time. No council robes, no formal title. "I am not certain yet whether that change will be welcomed by everyone in my court." "Most important changes aren't welcomed by everyone at first," I said. "That's usually how you know they matter." He was quiet for a while, watching the same stars I was watching. "My granddaughter asked me tonight why we ever believed strength required cruelty," he said eventually. "I did not have a good answer for her. I suspect I will be thinking about that question for the rest of my life." "That's a good place to start," I said. "Better late than never." He nodded slowly, something like the beginning of respect settling into the lines of his ancient face, and for a long moment neither of us said anything else, because sometimes the most important lessons do not need any further words at all.